The austere life of St. Thomas and his incessant labors increased the natural delicacy of his constitution, and he had frequent attacks of illness, which however, do not appear ordinarily to have caused him to desist from the labor of composition. Surgery was rough and ready in the 13th century, and the extreme sensitiveness of St. Thomas's organization rendered its operations very terrible to him. On one occasion, when obliged to undergo a cautery, he begged the infirmarian to warn him of the coming of the surgeons, when he stretched himself on his bed and immediately went into ecstasy, remaining motionless whilst his flesh was burnt by the red-hot irons. His clothes were always the poorest in the convent, and his love of holy poverty was so great that his Summa against the Gentiles was written on the back of old letters and other scraps of paper. In vain did the sovereign pontiffs press upon his acceptance the archbishopric of Naples and other ecclesiastical dignities, together with ample revenues. Nothing could shake his determination to live and die a simple religious, and they were obliged to withdraw their offers, being unwilling to afflict one so dear to them. He who was the oracle of his age loved to preach to the poor and lowly, and we are told that they always listened to him gladly and with much fruit to their souls. He was full of compassion for their wants, and even gave away his own clothes to cover them. Humility was ever his characteristic virtue. So thoroughly had he realized the greatness of God, and his own nothingness, that in a moment of intimacy he was able to say to a friend, "Thanks be to God. Never has my knowledge, my title of doctor, nor any of my scholastic acts aroused in me a single movement of vainglory. If any motion has arisen, reason has instantly repressed it." From his humility sprang his extreme modesty in the expression of his opinion. Never in the heat of disputation or at any other time was he known to lose his unruffled serenity of temper, or to say a word that could wound the feelings of another, and he bore the most cutting insults with imperturbable calmness. His life was full of examples of his spirit of humility and religious obedience. On one occasion, when, as a young religious, he was reading in the refectory at Paris, he was told by the official corrector to pronounce a word in a way evidently incorrect. St. Thomas obeyed, and made the false quantity. When asked how he could have consented to so obvious a blunder, he replied, "It matters little whether a syllable be long or short, but it matters much to practice humility and obedience." In later years, when the saint was teaching at Bologna, a lay brother obtained leave from the prior to take as companion the first religious brother whom he should find disengaged. Seeing St. Thomas, who was a stranger to him, walking up and down the cloister, he addressed himself to him, saying that the prior wished him to accompany him through the city, where he had business to transact. The saint, though suffering from lameness, and perfectly aware that the lay brother was under some mistake, immediately obeyed the summons, and went limping through the city after his companion, who, from time to time found fault with his slowness. When the lay brother discovered his mistake his apologies were profuse, but the saint replied, "Don't be troubled my dear brother, I am the one to blame. I am only sorry that I could not be more useful." To those who asked why he did not explain the mistake, he gave this golden answer: "Obedience is the perfection of the religious life, by it, man submits to man for the love of God, as God rendered himself obedient unto men for their salvation." St. Thomas was very slow to believe evil of others. He always thought everyone was better than himself, but, when a fault was proved beyond the possibility of a doubt, he wept over it as though he had committed it himself, and his zeal demanded that it should be severely corrected, according to the saying of St. Augustine, with charity towards the offender, and hatred against the sin. One of the brethren once pressed him to say what he considered the greatest favor he had ever received from God, sanctifying grace of course, accepted. After a moment's reflection, he replied, "I think that of having understood whatever I have read." He remembered everything he had once heard, so that his mind was like a well-stocked library. He often wrote, dictating at the same time on other subjects to 3 or 4 secretaries, and never losing the thread of the arguments.